The rain hammered against the old farmhouse like angry fists. Jake Morrison sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, the wind howled through the empty fields, bending the tall grass flat against the muddy ground. He liked nights like this, quiet, lonely, safe. Jake was 42 years old with rough hands and tired eyes. He fixed farming equipment for the colonists who lived nearby. It was simple work, and he preferred it that way. 5 years ago, he had been a colony surveyor, leading teams across unexplored planets. Then came the accident, a cave-in on a mining world. He survived. His team didn't. After that, Jake bought this farmhouse on the edge of nowhere and never looked back. The storm grew worse as midnight approached. Lightning cracked across the sky, turning everything white for half a second. Thunder followed, shaking the windows. Jake finished his coffee and headed for bed. Tomorrow would be another quiet day, just like he wanted. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. A crash from his barn, followed by a low, pained moan that made his skin prickle. Jake grabbed his flashlight and the old plasma pistol he kept by the door. He pulled on his boots and rain jacket, then stepped out into the storm. The barn door hung open, swinging in the wind. Jake's heart pounded as he approached. Raiders sometimes hit the outer colonies looking for supplies. He raised his pistol and stepped inside, sweeping the flashlight across the darkness. What he saw made him freeze. 2 creatures lay collapsed in the hay. They were covered in wounds, their bodies trembling. At first, Jake thought they might be some kind of alien wildlife. Then one of them raised its head and he saw the distinctive horns, the scaled hide, the wings folded tight against its back. Dragons. Jake had seen dragons before, but only from a distance. Everyone in the galaxy knew about them. They were powerful, proud, and dangerous. Their species had mastered space travel long before humans left Earth. Dragon warships could destroy entire fleets. Their warriors were legendary, and they never ever asked for help. These 2 were young, maybe not even fully grown. One had dark red scales that looked almost black in the dim light. The other was pale gray, almost silver. Both were starving. Jake could see their ribs beneath their scales. The red one had a deep gash across its shoulder. The gray one's wing was torn. They watched him with golden eyes full of fear and desperation. Jake lowered his pistol. He should report this. Dragons on human worlds without authorization meant trouble with the Galactic Council. But looking at these 2, Jake couldn't see dangerous aliens. He just saw 2 kids who were dying. He holstered his pistol and approached slowly, hands raised. The red dragon hissed weakly, trying to look threatening. The gray one just watched him, too exhausted to react. "Easy," Jake said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." He went back to the house and grabbed everything he could carry. Medical supplies, blankets, and most importantly, food. He had protein rations meant for emergency situations. They weren't much, but they were better than nothing. He also filled a large bucket with water. When he returned to the barn, both dragons were still conscious, watching him. Jake set down the water first, pushing it toward them. The gray one crawled forward and drank desperately. The red one hesitated, then followed. Next, Jake opened the protein rations. They came in dense bars that smelled awful but contained everything a body needed to survive. He broke them into pieces and offered them to the dragons. Again, the gray one ate first. The red one watched Jake carefully before taking the food. After they ate, Jake examined their wounds. The gash on the red dragon's shoulder was deep but clean. He applied antiseptic gel and wrapped it with bandages. The gray dragon's wing would need time to heal, but Jake splinted it as best he could. Both dragons were too weak to resist, though the red one grumbled the whole time. "You're going to be okay," Jake told them, though he wasn't sure they understood human speech. He spread blankets over them and sat down nearby, keeping watch. The storm raged on outside, but inside the barn it was almost peaceful. Eventually, both dragons fell asleep. Jake stayed awake, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Over the next few days, Jake continued to care for them in secret. He brought them food and water 3 times a day. He changed their bandages and made sure they stayed warm. Slowly, they grew stronger. On the 3rd day, the gray dragon spoke to him. Its voice was soft and raspy, but the words were clear. "Thank you." Jake nearly dropped the food he was carrying. "You can speak?" "Yes," the dragon replied. "I am Ash. My sister is Ember." Ember, the red dragon, snorted but didn't open her eyes. She was pretending to sleep, but Jake could tell she was listening. "Why are you here?" Jake asked. "What happened to you?" Ash was quiet for a long moment. War, our clan, our family. They are gone, we ran. We had nowhere else to go. Jake didn't press for details. He knew about the Dragon Civil War. It had been going on for years, somewhere deep in Dragon territory. The Galactic Council tried to stay out of it. Dragon problems were dragon business. You're safe here, Jake said. For now. Over the following weeks, the dragons recovered. Ember was bold and curious, always asking Jake questions about humans and Earth. She wanted to know everything. Why did humans build with metal instead of stone? Why did they eat cooked food? Why did they live alone instead of in clans? Ash was quieter, more thoughtful. He watched Jake carefully, learning his routines and habits. Sometimes Jake would catch Ash staring at him with those golden eyes, and he wondered what the dragon was thinking. Jake learned about them too. Dragons weren't just powerful warriors. They were artists, philosophers, and storytellers. They valued honor above everything else. They remembered debts, both good and bad, for generations. One night, Jake sat with them in the barn and told them about his team. About the cave-in. About how he blamed himself for not seeing the warning signs. He had never told anyone the full story before. Ember listened carefully, then said, "You carry their memory. That is honorable." "It doesn't feel honorable," Jake replied. "It feels like failure." "Survival is not failure," Ash said quietly. "You live so their story could be told." Jake had never thought about it that way. The weight in his chest felt a little lighter after that. 2 months passed. Ember and Ash were fully healed now. They could fly again, though they stayed close to the barn. Jake knew they couldn't stay forever. Eventually, someone would notice. Eventually, they would be found. The decision came on a clear, cold night. Jake was closing up the barn when Ember approached him. She was almost twice his size now, her scales gleaming in the moonlight. "We must leave," she said. "If we stay, we put you in danger." Jake had known this was coming, but it still hurt. "Where will you go?" "We will find others like us," Ash said, stepping up beside his sister. "Others who survived. We will rebuild. Will you be safe?" Jake asked. Ember's eyes softened. "Because of you, we have a chance. You gave us time to heal. You gave us hope. We will never forget this." "Dragon memory is long," Ash added. "We owe you a debt of honor." "One day we will repay it," Jake shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone should do." "That is why the debt is real," Ember said. They left that night, 2 dark shapes rising into the starlit sky. Jake watched them disappear into the distance, feeling more alone than he had in years. He returned to his quiet life, fixing machines and keeping to himself. Sometimes he thought about the dragons, wondering if they survived, if they found what they were looking for. But mostly he tried not to think about them at all. It was easier that way. 5 years passed and Jake Morrison never saw the dragons again. He assumed that was the end of the story. He had helped 2 refugees in need and they had moved on with their lives. That was enough. He had no idea how wrong he was. 5 years changed things in small ways. Jake's hair had more gray in it now. The lines around his eyes had deepened. His hands were just as rough, maybe rougher. The farmhouse needed repairs he kept putting off. The barn where he once sheltered 2 dragons now just stored broken equipment and old tools. Life continued in its quiet rhythm. Jake fixed farming machines for the colonists. He drank his coffee in the mornings and watched the sunset in the evenings. He rarely thought about Ember and Ash anymore. When he did, it was brief. A flash of memory on a cold night, a wondering if they made it. Then he would push the thoughts away and focus on something else. The galaxy kept turning. Humanity spread to more worlds, building colonies on planets that had once seemed too far away. New trade routes opened. New technologies emerged. And somewhere out there, beyond human space, the Dragon Civil War finally ended. Jake heard about it on the news. The reporter said something about a new dragon government and peace treaties, but he didn't pay much attention. Dragon business was dragon business. On a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, Jake was in his garage working on a broken harvester. The machine belonged to a farmer named Pete Collins who grew grain on the eastern fields. The harvester's power core had burned out and Jake was installing a replacement. His hands were covered in grease and he was humming an old Earth song he barely remembered the words to. Then he heard the sound. It started as a low rumble like distant thunder, but the sky was clear. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and stepped outside. Other colonists were coming out of their houses too, looking up. The rumble grew louder, deeper, vibrating in his chest. Ships were entering orbit, not human ships. These were different, larger, sleeker. Their hulls shimmered with colors that seemed to shift in the sunlight. Jake recognized them immediately. Dragon warships. He counted 6 of them moving in perfect formation. They held position above the planet, not descending but not leaving either, just watching, waiting. The local news channels exploded with speculation. Reporters talked over each other, trying to explain what was happening. Dragon ships rarely visited human worlds. When they did, it was usually for formal diplomatic business. But there had been no announcement, no warning. The colonial authority had no idea why they were here. Jake felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He tried to ignore it. This had nothing to do with him. It was probably just routine business, maybe a fuel stop or a navigation check. Dragons had every right to pass through human space, but the knot in his stomach didn't go away. That evening, Jake tried to focus on dinner. He heated a simple meal and ate without tasting it. The television in the corner played news coverage of the dragon ships. Analysts debated what it meant. Politicians called for calm. The colonial governor released a statement saying everything was under control. Jake turned off the television and sat in silence. The house felt too quiet. He found himself looking out the window at the darkening sky, searching for shapes that weren't there. Around 9 o'clock, he heard a vehicle approaching. That was odd. Nobody visited him at night. Jake went to the window and saw a sleek black transport landing in his yard. It wasn't a human vehicle. The design was too elegant, too organic. It was dragon-made. The knot in Jake's stomach pulled tight. He walked to his front door and opened it before anyone could knock. 3 figures stood on his porch, and Jake had to tilt his head back to look at them properly. They were dragons in their humanoid forms, towering over him by at least 2 feet. They wore armor that gleamed like polished obsidian, with symbols etched into the metal that Jake didn't recognize. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. The one in front had scars across his face and neck. He looked like he had seen 100 battles and won them all. When he spoke, his voice was deep and formal. "Jake Morrison? That's me," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I am Talon, commander of the Royal Dragon Guard. By decree of the Dragon Empress, you are summoned to the Dragon homeworld." Jake blinked. "I'm what?" "You are summoned to appear before the Empress," Talon repeated. "You will come with us immediately." "Wait, hold on," Jake said. "I don't understand. Why would the Empress want to see me? I'm just a mechanic. I haven't done anything." Talon's expression softened slightly just for a moment. "2 members of the royal family have specifically requested your presence. I believe you know them. Ember and Ash." The names hit Jake like a physical blow. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Ember and Ash. The 2 starving refugees he had sheltered 5 years ago. They were alive. They were part of the royal family, and they wanted to see him. "I don't understand," Jake said again. "Royal family?" "They were refugees. They were running from a war." "Much has changed in 5 years," Talon said. "If you come with us, you will understand. But we must leave now. The Empress does not wait." Jake looked back at his house, at his quiet life, at everything he had built to keep himself safe from the chaos of the galaxy. Then he looked at Talon and the 2 guards behind him. He thought about Ember and Ash, about the 2 frightened younglings who had collapsed in his barn. "Can I pack a bag?" he asked. "You will not need your possessions," Talon said. "Everything will be provided." Jake grabbed his jacket and locked his door. As he walked toward the dragon transport, he noticed colonists watching from their windows. Pete Collins stood in his doorway, mouth hanging open. Jake gave him a small wave. Pete didn't wave back. The inside of the transport was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The seats adjusted to his body automatically. The walls seemed to glow with soft light. There were no visible controls, no buttons or screens. Everything was seamless and organic. Talon sat across from him as the transport lifted off. The other 2 guards remained standing, their expressions unreadable. Jake watched his farmhouse shrink below them, then disappear as they climbed toward orbit. "Can you tell me what happened?" Jake asked. "With Ember and Ash?" Talon was silent for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. "The 2 dragons you sheltered were not ordinary refugees. They were the last surviving children of Emperor Corvin, the rightful ruler of the dragon clans." Jake's mouth went dry. "Emperor?" "Corvin was assassinated at the beginning of the Civil War," Talon continued. The traitor Vex led the rebellion, seeking to claim the throne for himself. He hunted Corvin's children, trying to eliminate the royal bloodline completely. For months, Ember and Ash ran. They were wounded, starving, and alone. Then they found you. I didn't know, Jake said quietly. They never told me. They could not risk it, Talon said. Knowledge of their identity would have put you in grave danger. But because of the time you gave them, they survived. They healed. They grew strong, and when they were ready, they returned to Dragon Space and led the counter-rebellion. Jake tried to process this. The two younglings he had fed protein rations and bandaged with medical tape had led a rebellion. They had fought a war. They had won. Ember claimed the throne as the rightful heir, Talon said. Ash serves as her commander and protector. Together, they united the dragon clans and ended the civil war. They have ruled for 3 years now, and their reign has brought peace our people have not known in decades. And they remember me? Jake asked. Talon's scarred face showed something that might have been respect. Dragons never forget a debt of honor. You saved their lives when they had nothing. You gave them shelter and asked for nothing in return. In dragon culture, such a debt is sacred. It must be repaid. The transport docked with one of the warships in orbit. Jake was led through corridors that seemed too beautiful to be military vessels. Everything was art. The walls, the floors, even the doorways were crafted with precision and care. They passed other dragons, all of whom stopped and stared at Jake with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. He was brought to a private cabin and told to rest. The journey to the dragon homeworld would take 3 days. Jake sat on the bed, which was far too large for him, and tried to understand what was happening. Ember and Ash were alive. They were royalty, and they had sent the Royal Dragon Guard to bring him across the galaxy. The quiet life he had built was gone, at least for now. He thought about turning back, about asking to return to his farm. But he couldn't. He needed to see them. He needed to know they were okay. The ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, and Jake felt the familiar lurch in his stomach. Outside the window, the stars blurred into lines of light. He was leaving human space behind, heading into dragon territory where few humans had ever gone. He didn't sleep that night. He just sat and watched the stars blur past, wondering what waited for him at the end of this journey, wondering if the two younglings he remembered would still recognize him, wondering if he would recognize them. 3 days felt like an eternity and an instant all at once. When the ship finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel, Jake pressed his face to the window and saw something that took his breath away. The dragon homeworld hung in space like a jewel. It was nothing like Earth or the colonies. This was something else entirely, something ancient and powerful and beautiful beyond words, and somewhere down there Ember and Ash were waiting for him. The shuttle descended through clouds that shimmered with colors Jake had no names for. Purple mixed with gold, green blended into silver. The air itself seemed alive with light. As they broke through the cloud layer, Jake pressed his face against the window and stared at the world below. The dragon homeworld defied everything Jake knew about planets. Crystal spires rose from the ground like frozen lightning, reaching thousands of feet into the sky. Mountains floated in the air, held aloft by forces Jake couldn't understand. Waterfalls flowed upward instead of down, and cities were built into the sides of active volcanoes, the buildings somehow existing in harmony with the flowing lava. It's beautiful, Jake whispered. Talon, sitting across from him, nodded. This is Drakenheim, the eternal home of our people. No human has walked our soil in 50 years. You should feel honored. Jake did feel honored, but mostly he felt terrified. The shuttle flew over a city that must have held millions of dragons. The architecture was impossible. Buildings twisted and curved in ways that should have collapsed under their own weight. Gardens grew on walls and ceilings. Everything gleamed and pulsed with energy. They landed at what Talon called the Imperial Palace. It sat atop the largest floating mountain Jake had seen, surrounded by smaller peaks that orbited it like moons. The palace itself was a massive structure of white stone and crystal, with towers that reached into the clouds. Dragon guards lined the landing platform, all wearing the same obsidian armor as Talon. Jake stepped off the shuttle on shaky legs. The air smelled different here. Cleaner, sharper. It tingled in his lungs with each breath. He followed Talon through massive doors that opened without anyone touching them. Inside, the palace was even more magnificent. The floors were made of polished stone that reflected like mirrors. The ceilings were so high Jake couldn't see them clearly. Art covered every surface. Paintings, sculptures, tapestries that seemed to move on their own. They walked for what felt like hours. Dragons stopped to watch them pass. Some bowed to Talon. Others stared at Jake with expressions he couldn't read. He felt small and out of place, a mechanic from nowhere in a world of legends. Finally, they reached a set of golden doors guarded by 4 dragons in ceremonial armor. Talon stopped and turned to Jake. "Beyond these doors is the throne room," he said. "You will show respect to the Empress. You will bow when presented to her. You will speak only when spoken to. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, his throat too dry to speak. "One more thing," Talon said, and his scarred face softened again. "They have missed you. Both of them." "That is not a commander speaking. That is simply the truth." The golden doors swung open. The throne room was vast. The ceiling disappeared into darkness high above. Pillars of crystal lined the walls, each one glowing with internal light. At the far end of the room, on a raised platform, sat a throne made of black stone and silver metal. And on that throne sat a dragon that made Jake's breath catch. She was magnificent. Her scales were deep red, almost black in some lights, brilliant crimson in others. She wore robes of gold and silver that flowed like water. A crown of twisted metal and jewels sat upon her head. Her wings were folded behind her, but Jake could see they spanned at least 30 feet. Her golden eyes locked onto him the moment he entered, and Jake felt the weight of that gaze down to his bones. This was Ember, the starving youngling he had fed protein rations, the frightened refugee who had asked him endless questions about humans. She was a queen now, an empress, powerful beyond measure. Standing beside the throne was another dragon, slightly smaller but no less impressive. His scales were silver gray like polished metal. He wore armor instead of robes, with a sword strapped to his back. His eyes were sharp and watchful. This was Ash, the quiet one, the careful one. Now he looked like a warrior who could face an army alone and win. Jake walked forward on trembling legs. Talon stayed behind. The throne room was silent except for Jake's footsteps echoing on the polished floor. He tried to remember the protocol. Bow when presented. Speak only when spoken to. Don't embarrass himself or humanity. He reached the base of the platform and stopped. For a moment he just stood there, looking up at the 2 dragons who had once collapsed in his barn. They looked down at him and Jake couldn't tell what they were thinking. Then Ember stood. She stepped down from her throne, moving with fluid grace. She walked down the platform stairs, her robes trailing behind her. Ash followed, one hand on his sword hilt. They approached Jake and he remembered he was supposed to bow. He started to bend forward. "Don't," Ember said softly. Jake froze, half-bent. Ember closed the distance between them until she stood directly in front of him. Up close, she was even more impressive. She could have killed him with one claw. Instead, she knelt down, bringing her massive head level with his. Her golden eyes were exactly the same as he remembered. Fierce and intelligent, and right now warm with emotion. "Hello, Jake," she said. Jake's eyes stung. He tried to speak but couldn't find words. Ash moved to stand beside his sister, and he was looking at Jake the same way. Like they were seeing an old friend they thought they'd lost forever. "You're alive," Jake finally managed. "You made it, because of you," Ember said. "We would have died in that barn if you had not helped us. We would have died 100 times over in the years that followed if we had not had time to heal." "I heard what happened," Jake said. "The war. The rebellion. I can't believe you did all that." "We had no choice," Ash said quietly. "Vex would have hunted us forever. We had to fight back. We had to take back what was ours." Ember reached out with one massive claw and very gently touched Jake's shoulder. The gesture was so careful, so full of affection, that Jake felt tears threaten to spill over. "We never forgot you," she said. "Even in the darkest moments when we thought we would not survive, we remembered the human who gave us shelter when he had every reason to turn us away. We remembered your kindness. It gave us strength." "I just did what anyone would do," Jake said, his voice rough. "No," Ash said firmly. "Most would have reported us to the authorities. Most would have feared us. You chose compassion over fear. That is rare in any species." Ember stood, rising to her full height. Her voice became more formal, though Jake could still hear the warmth beneath it. "Jake Morrison, you saved the lives of the Dragon Empress and her commander. You preserved the royal bloodline and made possible the end of our civil war. In doing so, you saved countless lives. both dragon and those of other species affected by the conflict. This debt must be acknowledged and repaid. You don't owe me anything, Jake protested. I helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted a reward. That is precisely why the debt is real, Ember said. She gestured, and servants appeared from side doors carrying items Jake couldn't quite see. I offer you a position as official advisor to the Dragon Throne. You would be the first human to hold such an honor. You would have influence over decisions that affect billions of lives across multiple star systems. Jake's mind reeled. I'm not qualified for that. I'm a mechanic. You will also receive a noble title within Dragon Society, Ember continued. Land on any world you choose. Wealth sufficient to live in comfort for 10 lifetimes, and the protection of the Royal Dragon Guard for you and any family you may have. The servants laid out the offerings, robes of office, documents with official seals, data tablets showing properties across multiple worlds. It was overwhelming. It was too much. Ember, I can't, Jake said. This isn't me. I'm not a nobleman or an advisor. I just fix machines. I live on a farm. I like my life quiet and simple. Ember's eyes narrowed slightly. You refuse the Empress's gifts? For a moment, Jake felt real fear. Then he saw the corner of Ember's mouth twitch and he realized she was teasing him. Some things never changed. I'm not refusing, he said carefully. I'm just saying I wouldn't be good at those things. I'd make a terrible advisor. I know nothing about politics or diplomacy. I'd probably start a war by accident. Ash made a sound that might have been a laugh. Even Ember smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth that somehow didn't look threatening. You are far wiser than you believe, she said. But I understand. You value your simple life. That is also honorable. She thought for a moment, then nodded. A compromise, then. You will be named an honorary member of the Royal Dragon Guard. It is purely ceremonial and comes with no obligations, but it signifies that you are under our protection and have earned our highest respect. Can you accept that? Jake considered. A ceremonial title he could accept. It would mean something without requiring him to change his entire life. Yes, I can accept that. Good, Ember said. Additionally, I will establish a formal treaty between the dragon clans and humanity. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, mutual defense pacts. Your species has much to offer the galaxy, and we have kept you at arm's length for too long. That changes now. Jake felt the weight of those words. A treaty between dragons and humans could change the course of history. Wars could be avoided. Technologies could be shared. It was bigger than anything he had ever been part of. But I have one request, Jake said. Ember raised her head, interested. Name it. Visit me sometimes, Jake said. Not as Empress and Commander, but as Ember and Ash, the two younglings I met in my barn. Come have dinner. The next few days passed in a blur. Jake was given quarters in the palace that were larger than his entire farmhouse. Servants brought him food he couldn't pronounce and clothes made from fabrics that seemed to shift colors in the light. He was introduced to dragon nobles, military commanders, and scholars who all treated him with a respect that made him deeply uncomfortable. But the best moments were the quiet ones. Ember and Ash would visit his quarters in the evening, leaving their titles and responsibilities at the door. They would sit and talk for hours, just like they had in Jake's barn 5 years ago. Ember still asked endless questions. Ash still watched and listened carefully, and Jake felt less alone than he had in years. On the third evening, Ember arrived looking troubled. She dismissed her guards and sat heavily on the floor of Jake's room. Ash entered behind her, his expression grim. Something's wrong, Jake said. It wasn't a question. Ember nodded slowly. Not all of my people are happy with the changes I'm making. The treaty with humanity is controversial, and honoring you publicly is seen by some as weakness. Who's upset? Jake asked. A warlord named Vex leads the opposition, Ash said. He moved to the window looking out over the city. He commanded Vex's forces during the Civil War. When we defeated the rebels, we offered mercy to those who surrendered. Vex bent the knee and we allowed him to keep his titles and lands. But he has never truly accepted our rule. He thinks the old ways are best, Ember explained. Dragons ruling through strength alone. No alliances with other species. No compassion shown to anyone outside our own kind. He sees my gratitude to you as an insult to dragon pride. Jake felt cold. You think he'll try something? We know he will, Ash said flatly. The ceremony to honor you is scheduled for tomorrow. Every major clan leader will attend. It is the perfect opportunity for Vex to make a statement. He could challenge Ember's right to rule in front of the entire dragon nation, then cancel the ceremony. Jake said immediately. It's not worth the risk. Ember's eyes flashed. If I cancel, I show weakness. Vex wins without even fighting. The clans who support me will question my strength. Everything I have built could collapse. But if you go forward, you risk a civil war starting all over again, Jake argued. Over me, over honoring a human. That's insane. It is not about you, Ash said, turning from the window. Vex has been looking for an excuse to challenge us for months. If not this, it would be something else. Better to face him now on our terms than to wait for him to strike when we are unprepared. You're talking about fighting, Jake said. People could die. Dragons, Ember corrected gently. Dragons will die if it comes to that. But we cannot rule through fear of conflict. If we back down now, we show that anyone with enough force can dictate our decisions. That is not the future I want for my people. Jake looked between them. These two dragons who had once been helpless refugees. Now they were rulers making decisions that would affect millions of lives. He felt useless. A simple mechanic caught up in events far beyond his understanding. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Ember smiled sadly. Be there tomorrow. Stand with us. That is all we ask. And if things go wrong? Jake pressed. Then you run, Ash said seriously. Talon will be assigned to protect you. If violence breaks out, you leave immediately. You are not a warrior, Jake. We do not expect you to fight. But Jake remembered standing in his barn watching two wounded younglings eat protein rations. He remembered thinking that if someone came for them, he would stand between them and danger. That feeling hadn't changed, even if the younglings were now rulers of an empire. I'll be there, he said, whatever happens. The ceremony was scheduled for noon in the grand arena. Jake woke early, too nervous to sleep properly. He dressed in the formal clothes the servants had prepared, a black suit with silver embroidery that apparently represented his new status as an honorary Royal Guard member. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. Talon arrived to escort him. The scarred commander wore full ceremonial armor that gleamed in the morning light. He carried no weapons, but Jake knew dragons didn't need weapons to be dangerous. Are you ready? Talon asked. No, Jake said honestly. But let's go anyway. The walk to the arena took them through the palace and out into the city. Dragons lined the streets, watching. Some looked curious. Others looked hostile. Jake kept his eyes forward and tried to project confidence he didn't feel. The grand arena was enormous. It could hold tens of thousands of dragons, and today it was full. Jake was led to a platform in the center of the arena floor. Ember sat on a throne on one end of the platform. Ash stood beside her, now wearing full military armor with his sword on his back. Other dragon nobles filled the stands, clan leaders, military commanders, scholars, and representatives from every corner of dragon society. Jake stood at the base of the platform, feeling very small and very exposed. The crowd was loud, a rumbling conversation of thousands of dragons all talking at once. Then Ember raised one claw and instant silence fell. She stood, her crimson robes flowing around her. Her voice rang out across the arena, amplified by technology Jake couldn't see. Today we honor a debt, Ember began. 5 years ago, when I was hunted and wounded, when my brother and I had nothing and no one, a human gave us shelter. He asked nothing in return. He expected no reward. He simply saw beings in need and chose compassion over fear. The crowd murmured. Jake couldn't tell if they were approving or disapproving. That human is Jake Morrison, Ember continued. He stands before you now. By his actions, he preserved the royal bloodline. He made possible our victory over the traitor Vex and the end of the Civil War. He embodies the highest ideals of honor that we dragons claim to hold dear. Today, I declare him an honorary member of the Royal Dragon Guard and a friend to the dragon people for all generations. Ember gestured, and servants brought forward a ceremonial piece of armor, a chest plate made of the same obsidian material as the Royal Guard's armor, sized for a human. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Jake climbed the steps to the platform. His heart hammered in his chest. Ember smiled at him encouragingly. He turned to face the crowd, and servants began fitting the armor to his chest. The weight of it was significant but not unbearable. It felt solid and real. Then chaos erupted. Explosions rocked the arena. Jake was thrown off his feet by the blast. His ears rang. Smoke filled the air. Through the haze, he saw dragons in dark armor storming the platform. They moved with military precision, cutting down guards who tried to stop them. Talon grabbed Jake and pulled him behind the throne. "Stay down," he commanded, then drew his sword and charged into the fight. Jake's head spun. He tried to understand what was happening. This was the attack Ash had predicted. Vex was making his move. Through the smoke, Jake saw Ember surrounded by attackers. She fought with claws and fire, but there were too many. Ash was battling his way toward her, cutting through enemies with his sword. But more kept coming. Then Jake saw him. A massive dragon in spiked armor, larger than any Jake had seen. His scales were black as night and his eyes burned with hatred. This had to be Vex. He moved toward Ember with deadly purpose. Jake didn't think. He just reacted. He grabbed a fallen guard's sword even though he had no idea how to use it properly. He ran toward Ember, screaming at Vex to get his attention. It worked. Vex turned, surprised to see a human charging at him. For half a second, the massive dragon just stared. Then he laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "The pet human wants to play warrior," Vex rumbled. "How entertaining." Jake raised the sword, his hands shaking. He knew he couldn't win this fight. Vex could kill him with one swipe, but Jake could buy time. He could give Ember a few more seconds to recover. Vex raised one massive claw, preparing to strike. Then Ash was there, his sword blocking Vex's attack. The sound of metal on claw rang across the arena. Ash pushed Vex back, putting himself between the warlord and Jake. "Your fight is with me," Ash snarled. Ember regained her feet, blood dripping from a wound on her shoulder. She moved to stand beside her brother, facing Vex together. The warlord's forces hesitated, seeing their leader confronted by both rulers. "This is your great empress?" Vex shouted to the crowd. "Saved by a human? Needing protection from her own brother? This is weakness." "No," Ember said, her voice carrying across the arena. "This is strength. Strength is accepting help when it is offered. Strength is building alliances instead of standing alone. Strength is fighting for something greater than your own pride." She glanced at Jake, still holding the sword he didn't know how to use, still standing despite every reason to run. Her eyes softened for just a moment before hardening again as she faced Vex. "You speak of the old ways," Ember continued, "of dragons conquering and ruling through fear. Those ways led to civil war. Those ways led to our people killing each other for decades. I offer something different. A future where dragons stand alongside others instead of above them. Then you are no true dragon," Vex roared. He charged forward, massive and terrible. The fight that followed was brutal and fast. Vex was powerful, a veteran of countless battles, but Ember and Ash fought as one, moving in perfect coordination. They had trained together their entire lives. They knew each other's movements instinctively. Ember stood over Vex, her claws at his throat. Blood dripped from wounds on her shoulder and side, but she held steady. The massive warlord struggled beneath her, then went still. He knew he was beaten. "Yield," Ember commanded, her voice carrying across the silent arena. Vex's eyes burned with hatred, but he spoke the words, "I yield." Ember released him and stepped back. Ash moved to her side, sword still drawn. Royal guards surrounded Vex and his followers, securing them. The immediate danger was over, but the arena remained tense. Thousands of dragons watched, waiting to see what their empress would do next. Jake dropped the sword he'd been holding. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't have held it much longer anyway. Talon appeared beside him, checking him for injuries. Jake was fine physically, though his mind was still catching up with what had just happened. He had charged at a dragon warlord with a sword. What had he been thinking? Ember turned to face the crowd. She was wounded and exhausted, but she stood tall. When she spoke, every dragon in the arena heard her clearly. "Today you witnessed a challenge to my rule," she said. "Vex claimed I am weak because I honor a human, because I seek alliances instead of conquest, because I believe in compassion as much as strength." She gestured to Jake, still standing on the platform in his partially fitted ceremonial armor. This human had every reason to flee when the fighting started. He is not a warrior. He had no obligation to stay. Yet when he saw me in danger, he ran toward the fight, not away from it. He placed himself between me and my enemy, knowing he would likely die. The crowd murmured. Dragons were looking at Jake differently now, with curiosity, with something that might have been respect. "That is true courage," Ember continued. "That is true honor. Not fighting because you are strong, but fighting despite being weak. Standing beside your friends even when it would be easier to run. This is what I mean when I say we must change. This human understands honor better than those who claim we should reject all outsiders." She walked toward Jake, who stood frozen. She knelt down so her massive head was level with his. Her golden eyes were warm and fierce and proud. "Jake Morrison," she said formally, "you have proven yourself in blood and fire. You stood with the Dragon Empress when she faced her enemies. You are worthy of the honor I bestow upon you." Servants returned with the ceremonial armor. This time they completed the fitting without interruption. The obsidian chestplate settled onto Jake's shoulders and he felt the weight of it. It was real now. Official. He was an honorary member of the Royal Dragon Guard, recognized before all the dragon clans. The crowd's murmur grew louder. Then one dragon in the stands stood and roared approval. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, thousands of dragons were roaring, the sound shaking the arena to its foundations. Not all of them, Jake noticed. Some remained seated, silent. But enough voices joined the chorus that the message was clear. The Empress's decision was accepted. Ember smiled, showing her sharp teeth. Ash nodded once, a gesture of approval. Jake tried to smile back, but mostly he just wanted to sit down before his legs gave out. The ceremony concluded with traditional dragon rituals Jake didn't fully understand. There was chanting in an ancient language and fire displays that lit up the arena. Finally, Ember declared the ceremony complete, and Jake was led back to the palace by Talon and a squad of guards. In his quarters, Jake collapsed onto the bed. The adrenaline was wearing off and exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. He had been in an arena full of dragons. He had witnessed a rebellion. He had charged at a warlord with a sword. It all seemed impossible. There was a knock at his door. Jake sat up as Ember and Ash entered. They had both been treated by healers, their wounds bandaged. They looked tired but satisfied. "That was insane," Jake said. "All of it. The attack, the fight, me with that sword. What was I thinking?" "You were thinking like a friend," Ember said, settling onto the floor. "You saw someone you cared about in danger and you acted. That is what friends do." "I almost got killed," Jake pointed out. "If Ash hadn't been there, Vex would have crushed me. But I was there," Ash said. "And I always will be. For both of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ember spoke again, her tone more serious. "What you did today changed something important. The dragons who doubted you saw your courage. They saw a human stand beside dragons in battle. That will make our alliance stronger. It will make the treaty more acceptable to those who were opposed." "I didn't do it for politics," Jake said. "I did it because you're my friends." "We know," Ember said softly. "That is why it mattered." Over the next week, Jake remained on the dragon homeworld as a guest of honor. He attended formal dinners with clan leaders. He toured dragon cities and saw wonders he never imagined existed. He learned about dragon, history and culture from scholars who seemed amazed that a human wanted to learn, but the best times were still the quiet evenings. With Ember and Ash, they would sit in his quarters or walk through the palace gardens, talking about everything and nothing. They told him stories of their childhood before the war, when their father was still alive and the clans were at peace. Jake told them about Earth, about growing up in a small town and learning to fix machines from his grandfather. On his last night before returning home, they shared dinner in Ember's private chambers. The food was exotic and delicious, though Jake couldn't identify half of what he was eating. They laughed and talked late into the night, and Jake felt a peace he hadn't known in years. "I don't want to leave," he admitted, "but I also miss my farm." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Ash said. "Home calls to us all eventually." "You will return, though," Ember said. It wasn't a question. "The treaty will require regular meetings between our peoples. I will need advisors I trust. And more importantly, I will want to see my friend." "I'll come back," Jake promised. "And you're both still welcome at my farm. Anytime. The invitation stands forever." "We will visit," Ember said. "Not as Empress and Commander, but as Ember and Ash. We will sit in your barn and eat your terrible protein rations and ask you annoying questions about humans." "Those rations are not terrible," Jake protested, laughing. "They're nutritious." "They taste like recycled boots," Ash said, and even he was smiling. The next morning, Jake boarded a dragon ship for the journey back to human space. The farewell was harder than he expected. Ember and Ash both came to see him off, along with Talon and what seemed like half the royal guard. "Thank you," Jake said, not sure how to express everything he felt. "For remembering me, for honoring me, for being my friends. Thank you, Ember replied, for saving 2 starving refugees when you had no reason to, for showing us that kindness exists in the universe, for standing with us when darkness came. Always, Jake said. The journey home took 3 days. Jake spent most of it looking out the window, watching the stars blur past. He thought about everything that had happened. 5 years ago, he had sheltered 2 frightened younglings. Today, he was returning as an honorary member of the Royal Dragon Guard, a friend to the Dragon Empress, and a bridge between 2 species. When the ship entered orbit around his colony world, Jake felt a mix of emotions: relief to be home, sadness to leave his friends behind, wonder at how much his life had changed. The shuttle descended toward his farm, and Jake saw his house exactly as he had left it. The barn, the fields, the quiet isolation he had chosen, but it wasn't the same. Not really. The galaxy was bigger now, more connected, and Jake had a place in it, however strange that seemed. He thanked the Dragon crew and stepped off the shuttle. It lifted away, leaving him standing in his yard. Pete Collins was watching from his porch next door, mouth hanging open again. Jake waved. This time Pete waved back, looking dazed. Jake went inside and made coffee. He sat at his kitchen table, drinking from his favorite mug, and tried to return to his normal routine. It almost worked, but the obsidian armor plate sat on his table, a reminder that normal had changed. 3 months later, Jake was in his garage working on a broken harvester when he heard the familiar sound of dragon wings. He looked up to see 2 shapes descending from the sky. They landed in his yard, folding their wings carefully to avoid damaging his fence. Ember and Ash stood there without robes or armor or guards. Just 2 dragons visiting a friend. Ember carried a large basket in her claws. We brought dinner, she called out. Real dragon food this time, not protein rations. Jake laughed and walked out to meet them. Your Majesty, he said with a mock bow. Commander, welcome to my humble farm. Just Ember and Ash, she corrected. No titles tonight. They went into the barn just like old times. Ember spread out the food while Ash examined Jake's tools with curiosity. They ate and talked and laughed as the sun set outside. And for Jake, sitting there with his strange and wonderful friends, everything felt right. The galaxy had changed. Dragons and humans were building a new relationship based on trust and mutual respect. Treaties were being signed. Trade routes were opening. History was being written. But in a small barn on a quiet farm, 3 friends just enjoyed each other's company. No politics. No ceremonies, no danger. Just food and conversation and the kind of peace that comes from being with people who truly understand you.